Welcome to the English with Kirsty podcast from www.englishwithkirsty.com. Here I'll be sharing with you tips, information and other learning resources so that you can improve your business English. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 65 of the English with Kirsty podcast. And today I want to talk about something from my own personal experience as a language learner, because as I've said before, I'm not just a teacher, I'm also a language learner. And like some of you, I also speak another language a lot of the time at work. So I speak German with my customers sometimes, certainly with people who want to find out more about the courses, and I produce some information in German as well. So I'm used to using two languages at work. And most of the time that's a really positive experience, things go really well, but sometimes I can think back over the course of my language learning journey, there have been some situations where people weren't positive about my German, and they weren't helpful, and they weren't particularly friendly. And I think this is something that we as teachers don't really talk about. We say that students should be more confident and try to help them to feel more confident about speaking, but we don't really touch on the subject of what do you do when people are unhelpful or unkind. And so that's what I want to do today. Because it does happen. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. So it's good to be prepared and to think about how you're going to respond. So I always ask myself 3 questions in situations like this. So number 1, is there any truth in what's been said? Because the person can be really mean and horrible, but maybe there is some grain of truth in their message there. So if there is, I want to find out what it is before I dismiss the whole comment. Number 2, how am I going to respond? Because I'm not responsible for other people's bad attitude. I'm not responsible for the way they behave, but I am responsible for how I respond. So how do I want myself to be seen by other people? What am I going to do? And 3, is there anything I can learn from this experience? Because I'd rather just be done with it, think about it, learn something and move on, because otherwise these things can have a tendency to try and take over your day. You keep thinking about it, what they said, how you felt, what you're going to do now. So be clear that you want to think about what you can learn and then move on, because these things don't deserve to take any more time than that. Okay, so the first kind of problem you get is impatience. People thinking that you're an idiot because you can't respond quickly enough in their native language. And that's not good. Sometimes it happens in stressful situations where people are really busy and feel they don't have time, but whatever the reason, it's still not a cool thing to do. And I remember when I started learning German, I had a situation like this. Somebody had asked me to do something and I wanted to ask a follow-up question, and I wasn't quite quick enough, and they were just like, oh, I'll do it myself. Can't you even do that? And I thought, that's just unnecessary. That's not good. I would have done it. I just needed a bit more time to get my sentence together. And to be honest, I think that's more of a reflection on the other person than on me, but it made me feel terrible because I just wished that I could have expressed myself better, but I couldn't because I was a beginner, and that's harder when you're a beginner. So, was there any truth in what they said? Well, no. Not really. They were just being impatient and I was on the receiving end of it. It wasn't nice, but it wasn't my fault because I was a beginner. How did I respond? I walked away. I think in my native language I may have had the confrontation, but in my native language it wouldn't have happened. So I just thought, okay, this isn't worth getting into a discussion about because I don't have the tools to do that. So I'm not going to pursue this anymore. What did I learn? I learned to have empathy for people in similar situations. If somebody's trying their best, then give them time. Don't be mean. Don't try to rush them. And I also learned that it's good to have some key phrases like, could you explain exactly how you want me to? Or can you clarify what you mean by? So I got some of those key stop phrases and learned them so that if a similar situation came up in the future, I wouldn't have the same problem. And I also learned that you shouldn't let one person knock your confidence, because at this time I was in a group of about 6 or 7 people, and there were some really nice people there. Some people who were kind and who didn't do that. So, don't let the actions of one person, don't focus on them, because there are plenty of other people who don't behave like that. So that's situation 1. Situation 2 is like, your mistakes are so funny, it's hilarious, somebody's trying to learn this other language and they made a mistake, isn't that funny? Well, no, actually it isn't, and anyone who's tried to learn another language knows that it's hard. So I don't mean if you say something that is actually funny or make a humorous mistake, because we can all laugh at our mistakes, and sometimes our friends will laugh with us. I don't mean something like that, but I just mean when someone wants to make fun of you because you made a mistake. And not so long ago I had an experience where I wrote something online and there was one word out of about 300 that was wrong. And somebody took the time to highlight the sentence with the incorrect word and then send it with like laughing faces. And when I saw that, I just thought, what an idiot. You know, what? Why would you do that? If you want to, there's plenty of nicer ways that you can show somebody that they've made a mistake and say, oh, you know, I've noticed that you said this and I think you meant that. You know, there are plenty of nice ways to do it, but sending laughing faces is not cool. So how did I, no, was there any truth in it? Well, yes, there was, because there was one mistake. So, okay, they were correct in that there was one word wrong, but their delivery wasn't helpful. So because of that, I fixed the mistake, but I didn't respond to them because I thought if that's how you're going to react, I don't know that I want to get into a conversation with you. So I just fixed the problem and didn't respond to the person who did that. And what did I learn? Well, check your text more thoroughly, perhaps. I probably would have seen it. I may not have done though. It's much easier to spot mistakes in your native language. And however hard you try, and I'm a real perfectionist, I get really cross with myself if I make mistakes, but however hard you try, if it's not your native language, you will make mistakes. That's just the way life is. And however good you get from time to time, mistakes will creep in, and you can't be expected to be at the same level as somebody who's been speaking this language all their life. So whilst I would say that you should always try a bit harder and do your best and want to be better than the day before, you have to accept that occasionally there will be mistakes, and that's part of life. Okay, number 3, you don't understand because it's not your native language. So people may be looking down on you or being patronizing because you don't speak their native language as well as they do. I was in a discussion, it was an email discussion with all the other participants were German. I was the only non-native speaker, and I didn't agree with something somebody had written. I think it was about the way that we should move forward with a particular action. And I expressed that, and they said, oh, you know, Kirsty, your German is very good, but I think the problem here is that you don't understand the discussion. I was really angry about that. Don't speak to me like that. Because that wasn't the issue at all. I could understand what was going on. I just didn't agree with him. I had a different opinion, and I'm entitled to that, even if German isn't my native language, and I maybe didn't at that time express things as eloquently as they did, because it was their native language. So I had a problem with this, because it's basically saying, oh, well, you know, it's good to have you in our team, but if you don't agree with us, it's because your German's rubbish and not because you have another opinion. I thought, no, that's not how we're going to work. So was there any truth in it? No. No, there wasn't. I had understood the discussion. How did I respond? I felt I couldn't just leave it like that, because not saying anything would be like agreeing. So I said, actually, I do understand the point you've made. I just don't agree with you. And that's fine if you don't agree with me, but don't say it's because my language skills aren't up to it, because that's not true. And what did I learn? I learned that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself in the other language and be clear that just because somebody else is more confident about expressing themselves, it doesn't mean that they're always right. And sometimes you just have to, even if you feel a bit uncomfortable about doing it. I didn't feel so bad because it was email and not a big room full of people, but sometimes you just do need to stand up for yourself. And sometimes they don't see you as an equal, other people, because you're not a native speaker, but that doesn't mean that you aren't, and that doesn't mean that your voice doesn't deserve to be heard. So yeah, that was experience number 3. And number 4, which is really the reason why I first thought about writing this, or because this is a blog post as well, I'll link the blog post and doing this podcast and the Facebook Live video. Your language skills are rubbish. And somebody didn't actually say that to me, but they may as well have. It was a forum in German, and I'd written something. It wasn't the best thing I've ever written. I admit that. I'd amended a text from before and left a couple of words in that didn't belong. So, yeah, I admit it wasn't my best. But a couple of minutes, or it felt like a few seconds after I posted it, somebody just wrote back and said, oh, well, if that's the standard of your language skills, people shouldn't bother working with you. And I thought, really? Really? Do we need to attack random strangers on the internet like that? Do we have nothing else to do? Was there any truth in it? Yes, there was. There were some mistakes in my German, and I know that. And looking back, I usually get things checked if they're going on the website, or if it's a new advert, I usually get everything checked by a native speaker. This hadn't been, but yeah, I could have checked it and I could have fixed a couple of the mistakes in it. But did it need to be delivered? Did the criticism need to be delivered in that way? People needn't bother working with you? No, I don't think it did. But then everybody's responsible for how they want to be seen on the internet. So I'm only responsible for what I do, how I react to that. So when I thought about how I was going to react, I realized that I'd come a long way, because in the past, if I'd seen something like that, I would have been horrified and deleted the post and wanted to run away. But I didn't. I just said, well, I'm not a native speaker, and sometimes I will make mistakes. I don't like it, but that's life. I can fix it now that I know about it, and I did ask them to be specific, so rather than just writing off the whole text, what specifically did they have a problem with, and they did respond to that. But I think, so what I did was I responded and said, whether or not I'm able to write German like a native speaker has no bearing on whether or not I can speak English and teach other people English. And I'm writing German here because this is the forum, the language of the forum, but basically you can't just you shouldn't speak to people like that. So that was that. And the third thing, what did I learn? Yeah, don't reuse texts without checking them thoroughly, especially if you're amending something. And don't keep thinking about it. Don't let someone else make you feel inferior. Yeah, if you can do something better next time, then do it. But don't take people's criticism on board to make you think, oh, I'm such an idiot, I can't do it, my language skills aren't good enough. Because everybody has days that are not their best days, and there are so many better ways of bringing someone's attention to that. Like, oh, there's a few typing errors there, did you see them? Maybe you want to check that again. Or I think you need to look at the text. But the other thing that I learned there was that was the minority of people, because most people would look at text, and I see them in English sometimes, think, oh dear, there's a few mistakes there, and just move on. Obviously not with my students and people that I'm working with, but just generally on the internet, I'll just think, okay, that doesn't look very professional, that doesn't look very good, and move on. And it takes somebody to say, hey, they basically said this just isn't very good, but it did bring my attention to the fact that there are a couple of things I needed to fix. So as somebody who writes and puts information online, this is important. And just wanted to mention that I do have the English Good to Go service. So if you're somebody that wants to have English texts online and you want to get them checked by a native speaker, then you can have a look at the Good to Go service, because that's what I do, either translating or proofreading, or just checking that the text and information for your website are written well and easy to understand, and that there aren't any mistakes in them. So if you're interested in that, you don't want to have the same experience as I did. As I said, most of the time I do get things checked by a native German speaker, but this time I didn't. And yeah, this time I didn't check it as well as I could have either. But anyway, if you're interested in Good to Go, then that's there as well. So most of the time people are really supportive and happy that you're trying to learn another language, and they will try to help you. But there are always those that don't, and I think it's just good to be prepared for, if you have a situation like that, to think about these questions. are they right? Because sometimes people are just horrible. You've got loads of trolls online, and if somebody starts writing comments about you, then sometimes they are just being unreasonable and you can ignore them. But just have a look first. Is there any truth in it? Is there anything you can learn? And think. Be mindful about your response. So rather than just reacting, how are you going to respond? And if you're really angry, go and have a cup of coffee, go for a walk, do something so that you're not quite as angry when you respond, especially if it's in writing. In person it's harder, but try to respond rather than just having an emotional reaction. And I know people have had far worse to deal with. Some people that I know, some of my friends, have had far worse experiences because of their language skills and people being mean to them. I didn't use those experiences because I wanted to focus on mine so I could talk about them in some detail. So I'm not saying other people don't have problems to deal with, because I know that sometimes it's a lot worse than what I've described. But I wasn't really focusing on bullying or people being picked on because of the language skills. I wanted to focus more here on those smaller, subtle problems that we have in our day-to-day lives with people not being very friendly about our language skills. So I'd be interested to know if you've had any similar experiences. If so, then you can write to me on the show notes page, which is www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast/episode 65. I'll also link there the blog post about this, so if you'd rather read it or you want to look back at something, you can do that by looking at the blog post. A couple of notices. I've been asked to do an episode about the English school system and education in England, so if you've got any questions about that, then send them to me and I'll make sure that I try to include them in the podcast. And finally, English with Kirsty now has a Patreon page. So the podcast content will always be free. Nothing's changing there. But if you'd like to support the show for $1, $3 or $5 a month, then that would be lovely. I'd be very happy. And you will also get some bonus content as a thank you for doing that. So I don't have a really expensive podcast set up, but there are costs associated with running the podcast. And if you would like to contribute to those, if you enjoy the show, then that would be great. I will also link the Patreon page to the show notes page. And if you've got any friends that you think would enjoy English with Kirsty as well, then why not share the episode with them? Why not let them know about it? And if you don't want to miss any episodes, then you can also subscribe. The links for iTunes and Stitcher are also on the show notes page. So I hope that was helpful. I know we're talking about a negative experience today, but I think it's good to be prepared for negative experiences and to think about how you're going to deal with them. So that was the plan for today. Hope that was useful. Have a good week and have fun learning English. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the English with Kirsty podcast. If you have any questions or comments, my email address is kirsty@englishwithkirsty.com, or you can go to www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast, where you'll find information about the individual episodes.